Hello, brilliant entrepreneur. It's Tash Corbin here, and welcome to another episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. This is episode number 286, which means you can find all the relevant links and show notes for today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/286. It's another Q&A episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast today, and we are talking about pivoting in your business. Specifically, I'm answering the question, how do you get people excited when you decide to make that pivot for your business? So let's dive in. I'm Tash Corbin, and this is the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. Today's question comes from the amazing Darlene Redman. You can find her at singlebosslady.com or on Instagram at singlebosslady. And we'll make sure that we link to those in the show notes of today's episode. Darlene asks, Tash, I would love to know what you do when you've done a slight pivot to help people to get to know what you do so that they are keen to buy from you. And this is a really beautiful question. And actually, I want to answer it about pivoting altogether because there are different strategies depending on how big that pivot might be. So the first question we need to answer is, how big is this pivot? So if it's a slight pivot in that you've refined down your niching, you've got a new product offering, you're changing a little bit about the way that you deliver your services, or maybe you've got a slight change in the subject area or the way that you support your ideal clients, then that's a pretty small pivot. And with a small or minor pivot, I recommend that we treat it as it is. It's actually no big deal. And the reason why I say it's no big deal is that we don't want to confuse your audience by having them think, oh, wow, there's this big change coming. And then they can't work out what the difference is between the new and the old, because that can create confusion. So what I would be doing, if it's a teensy pivot, right? If it's just a small adjustment to the way that you do business, or it's an adjustment to who you serve, or it's an adjustment to the way that you serve them, but it's small, then I would focus specifically on the new value proposition. And so I wouldn't be announcing the change. I wouldn't be telling people a change is coming. I would simply start talking about the new value proposition, the new thing, the new offer. You could do a launch of a new offer if that's something that you wanted to do. But I wouldn't be confusing people with messaging saying that your business is changing. And the reason why I recommend that, especially for a small pivot, is because we don't want to create a sense of, oh, I need to understand, when people don't need to understand. If you've changed your niche slightly and it has no material impact on how you serve people or the services that you offer, but there's just a bit of a shift in the messaging, just shift the messaging. You don't need to announce that there's a shift coming. And so you can continue on with business as usual, and people aren't necessarily as excited about your business as you are. The part they get excited about is how you support them and help them and what difference you can make to their lives, your value proposition. So instead, I would just focus on introducing the new value proposition nice and simply, nice and smoothly in a business as usual fashion in most instances. Of course, as I said, if it involves a new product or a new service, do a launch for that product or service. But I don't even recommend or necessarily think that every new service needs to have like a countdown to a new service, or, wow, there's going to be a new service coming. Keep an eye out for a new service, because people aren't excited by that to the way that you think that they would be excited by that. They get excited when they see something that you've shared that is going to help them where they are right now. So if you want to start recruiting people for that new offer, do a webinar or create a new lead magnet, or do some of your content that's going to speak to that new value proposition first and foremost, without needing to make any big announcements about something that might potentially be coming. Then when you do launch your thing, you've simply been attracting in and nurturing the people who are the right fit for that new service. Now, if the pivot is ginormous, let's say you're no longer offering one-to-one services anymore, or you're no longer working as a counselor, you're working more in a coaching space, or you are eliminating a product from your product suite, then you could, if that's something that is going to be something that you still want to sell before the pivot, you could use that as an opportunity to get people excited about their last opportunity to work with you in a certain way. Again, I wouldn't necessarily assume that people are going to get as excited about this as you are. But if it is something that they've been on the fence about, or they've had it on their list to work with you in that way, then letting them know, look, just so that you're aware, from date, this service will no longer be available. So if this is something that you were interested in, make sure you get in touch and let's discuss it. Can be a great way to get in some of those last sales if you've got time before that pivot occurs. Now, that doesn't apply to you, darling, because you're doing a slight pivot. So I would say first and foremost, focus on value proposition change rather than there's a pivot coming, because that isn't particularly meaningful to your audience. The second thing I want to say about this is that they will get excited when they know what's in it for them. So your job is not to get them excited about the pivot. Your job is to get them excited about what's in it for them. So if it's a new service offering, if it's a new message, if it's a new focus area, then get them excited through the lens of what's in it for them. And that would be through your content, your client attraction process, your lead magnets and webinars, and your products and services. So change them and tell people what's in it for them. The third thing I want to say about pivots is that a lot of people feel like they only get a few pivots in their business time and in their time as an entrepreneur. And I want to reassure you that it's not the same as in the corporate world. You know, in the corporate world, if you see someone has jumped from job to job to job to job every 6 months for the last 3 years, then you might consider them a bit flighty. Your belief that they are invested in the long term, building a career in your organization might be a little lower. And we can take a lot of that fear and worry from our careers into our businesses, and think that, well, if I'm going to keep pivoting and changing and making adjustments to my business, people will think I'm flighty. People will think I can't decide what I want to do. And that's actually not as big a deal as an entrepreneur or business owner. And the reason being is that your audience will never be as small as it is today. When it comes to pivots and changes of direction and refinements in your business, not as many people are noticing it as you think are noticing it. And your job as an entrepreneur is to find the thing and get clear on your thing as quickly and effectively as possible. So if that takes 8 pivots in the first 6 months, I would rather you take those 8 pivots. And that is why I am particularly focused on not making a big deal about the pivot itself. The pivot itself is not a big deal. What we make a big deal about is the new value proposition. And so when you are able to focus on the value proposition and not need to announce every change you're making in your business, then you're also not creating a perception of flightiness, and people are more drawn in who are a better fit right now. And the people for whom it's not a good fit right now, they don't go, oh, that doesn't suit me anymore, and disappear. They just stop engaging and they just kind of fade away. And that's okay, right? That's totally what we're here to do, is to narrow down and then create that momentum in the right direction. If you are running a race in the wrong direction and you'd already changed direction 3 times, you wouldn't go, oh, well, I'm still running in the wrong direction, but I'm committed to this direction now. You're not going to get any closer to the finish line by running in the wrong direction. And it's the same with your business. When you find that sweet spot, when you find that niche that really resonates for you, when you find that messaging, when you find that offer and that service, when you find that zone of genius for you to operate in, that's when you just know you're going in the right direction. And until that point in time, keep pivoting. There's no problem with that, especially if you're not making these grand announcements about the changes that you're making in your business. You just start to refine the way that you serve and the way that you offer. So with all of that being said, you know how big your pivot is, so you know whether you're going to make a big deal about it or not. You know that you want to focus on the value proposition and what's in it for them, not, what the changes are behind the scenes for you. And you're not so concerned about being flighty. You're allowed to pivot as often and as quickly as you need to. Then I want to reassure you and give you my number one piece of advice on how to get people excited. And the number one way to get people excited is to get them excited for the transformation that you facilitate and your value proposition. And I say value proposition a lot, but it is the best way to describe what gets people excited. Your value proposition is the perceived value of the transformation you facilitate through the eyes of your potential clients. And that's really important, through the eyes of your potential clients. So different people will value your transformation in different ways. It's the reason why you see people go and post into a Facebook group and they'll say, how much would you pay for this handmade such and such? And you'll have someone say $5 and you'll have someone say $50 and you'll have someone say $600. The reason why different people are giving different answers is because their perceived value of the thing is different. And that's why you should never ask that question in Facebook communities, by the way. Don't go and crowdsource your prices. The price is the price. That's your decision. I'll link to a pricing episode in the show notes of today's episode if that's something that's like popping up for you and you don't know how to price. But that's why the pricing is so different, is because different people, depending on what their priorities are, how much they feel that it aligns to their priorities, will value that transformation differently. So your number one job when it comes to refining in your business and pivoting and really starting to narrow in and find that sweet spot for yourself is to get very clear about the transformation that you facilitate, get very clear on who you are focused on when you are marketing, that's your niche, and get very clear on how you can maximize that value for your niche. And if a pivot is going to maximize the value of the transformation you facilitate, go for it, just do it and start talking about that value proposition. Just start talking about that transformation. You don't need to give us all the big updates on behind the scenes in your business and why you're making the decisions that you're making or any of those sorts of things. People will get excited when they can see, wow, this is really valuable for me. Okay, so if you have been listening along to this and you're thinking, ooh, how do I get to that sweet spot? How do I get to that momentum building in my business? I have a great free resource for you. It's called Fast Track Your Startup. And it's absolutely free. If you'd like to check it out, you can come over to the show notes at tashcorbin.com/286. And I will make sure we have a link to Fast Track Your Startup there for you. Thank you so much for your question, Darlene. Best of luck with your pivot. And until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now. Would you like more tips, tools, and resources to help you grow your heart-centered business? Head to tashcorbin.com today.